G'day there, Ray Corcoran here. In this week's video, I'm going to be going over 8 red flags to look out for when you are inspecting an investment property to buy. It's by no means an exhaustive list, as I always say, but it will give you a bit of a starting point in terms of like what stuff to actually look out for when you go to look at this property, and just to make sure that we de-risk the process for you. If you don't know what to look for, it can mean that you are susceptible to maybe expensive costs down the track, or maybe that it ends up being not as good of an investment as you may have thought it would be. Many houses look great on first impression, and the owners will typically try and polish it up to make it look as good as possible to get the maximum sale price, obviously. So it's our job to make sure that we look at it in a critical eye and make sure that we look at beyond the sort of surface appearance. The lawn might look nice, the place might have been repainted, but we need to look a little bit deeper to make sure that we don't end up buying something that ends up being a lemon. It's a big investment and it's a lot of money that you're putting forward. So you want to make sure that you're making the right investment, and we can't stop all risk, but we can reduce our risk by being a little bit more smart about it. And of course, this is in addition to having a really good building and pest inspector. Some people even get other people to do a private inspection if you need to. All of these services, I think, are a very worthwhile investment to make sure that you have multiple sets of eyes on the property to make sure that you don't miss anything and you know exactly what you're buying, and consequently you can negotiate and put forward a price that you're happy with based on what you know about the property. So the first thing is poor natural light. Now, a lot of agents will actually schedule inspections of properties when the natural light is at its best, and that's fine, and they'll turn all the lights on typically in the house. But just keep in mind that if you are after a house that does have nice natural light, that sometimes the property will be presented in a way that makes it maybe look a little bit better than it ordinarily would be. So just keep that in mind. Try and even turn the lights off when you get there in some of the rooms, and just see like what the natural light is like in the house. Number 2 is heat and airflow. So this place that I used to rent with my wife, or now wife, in Bondi, we had a little 1-bedroom apartment. It was tiny, but it was close to the beach, so it was great. But it was one of these places that we went to, and we were just renting there, but we moved in, it was all good, we were excited to be close to the beach. But once we actually lived there, we realized that it's actually horrendous for airflow. Because half the building was just the layout of the building, we got none of the sea breeze and all of the sun. And it basically meant that the apartment was a hot box 24/7 pretty much. And it ended up, and the place didn't have air conditioning as well, which made it a little bit worse. But the whole point is, and this applies when you have investment properties as well, look at which way the sun comes in, look at the sort of airflow, where are the windows, is there any certain rooms that maybe have, whether it's like walls on certain sides, where, maybe air, some places don't have heaps of windows in certain rooms as well, or they might have, a weird layout that means that they don't get a lot of the breezes coming through the house, or it doesn't flow very nicely. So just keep an eye out for that, because it can make it really unpleasant to live there. Of course, you can get aircon and stuff, but typically, obviously you got to pay for that as well, and there's bills associated with that, but definitely something to keep in mind. Some places are just really, really bad for airflow. And I'm going to talk about mold and stuff in a second, but I lived in another apartment where the place never got much natural light, and mold would happen around the windows, and it was actually really, really annoying. As well as being a health hazard, it was just super annoying because you always had to stay on top of it, and during certain parts of the year, it was just horrendous for that. So if that place had a better airflow, it wouldn't have been a problem ever. You just have to look after the place just like in the normal way. Number 3 is looking out for any major cracks. Now, many properties might have very, very minor cracks that might not be a problem. If they're over kind of 10 mil, it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And obviously a good building inspector will let you know whether it's a problematic crack or whether it's just like a little superficial one that's not really a worry. But as you're going through the property, look out for that. Some people will even try and paint over certain things or try and cover up certain things, but definitely look out for any cracks. Some houses are built on different types of soil. That means that it can be more prone to the soil sort of shifting underneath and cracks happening in the building. So look out for that. Ultimately rely on your building inspector, but you always want to keep an eye out for that sort of stuff, because also building inspectors can miss stuff. Even good building inspectors, they're not perfect, they're human like you and I. So it never hurts to have two sets of eyes looking for that sort of stuff. Number 4 is making sure that there's no easements. So easements are basically, it could be any sort of electrical or sewerage sort of services that are going underneath the property, quite often like, stormwater drains and that sort of stuff. My sister had a property that she bought, her family home, down in the Sutherland Shire, in the south part of Sydney. And they knew when they bought it, but it's quite a large block. And the back part of the block has an easement running through it. And they actually had developers coming to try and buy the land, and the easement affected how much they would be willing to pay for the property. And they didn't end up going through with a transaction, but it's just good to know when you're buying a property that, especially if it's a larger block and there's room to build maybe a second house or knock it down and build either apartments or townhouses, the value of that's going to be really affected by whether there's an easement or not. And basically the whole point of easements is obviously they provide essential services for the community or whatever, but you're not allowed to build on top of them because the council or whoever needs access to that stuff at any given time. So you can't just build over it because they need to get to that stuff sometimes. Number 5 is another thing to look for, is how big is the hot water system? So it's kind of almost a silly one, but I've been in places where the hot water system was insufficiently sized, and it's one of those things you don't think about until you deal with it. And now it's something that I always look for. You basically can run out of hot water in a very short period of time. I remember at one of the previous places that we lived, we had a hot water system that was like, just because of the smallness of the place, it had a small hot water system, and it meant that showers could only ever be a certain length. And the chance of having 2 showers back to back in the morning that went for more than a few minutes actually was a problem. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for, just making sure that it's not just some like undersized old unit, because that will cost you a few $1,000s to replace in most instances. And also just look at, turn on the taps, see how long it takes for the hot water to come through. There's certain instances like even my parents' place, because of the way that the plumbing was done, it takes a little while for the hot water to come on, more than usual. And it's basically because the distance of the pipes and probably the size of the unit as well, in terms of getting hot water through to that tap. So it's one of those little things that you probably won't think about when you're buying, but it is quite annoying when you're actually living there or when people are renting there. It's just a little bit annoying, and it's something that you just need to keep an eye out for. And also the water pressure in the taps. That's another thing that kind of is a little life inconvenience that pisses people off. But just check the water pressure in the taps. Like the shower stuff. Little things like that can really annoy people. So it's always interesting to see, just to make sure that it is, I guess, up to standard. Number 6 is what can you hear? So when you go to the property, have a listen. Is there a train station nearby? Is there noisy neighbors? Is there people doing, hardware stuff in their backyard? There's people that've got 50,000 cars in their backyard that are always working on stuff and doing using machinery and stuff. Is it just people, maybe kids in the area that are particularly, the super rowdy, more rowdy than normal kids? Anything like that. Same with traffic. Do you notice anything like that happening? The walls feel like they're paper thin there? That's always something to look out for. If you're trying to live there and have a comfortable, relaxing life, you want to make sure that there's, obviously there's always going to be some level of noise, which is fine, but you just want to keep an eye out, because sometimes properties will sell at a discount when their owners know that it's a horrendous place in terms of noise and not the quietest place. Number 7 is looking at the roof line. So you want to make sure that there's no sort of sagging when it comes to the roof line. That could be a symptom of something bigger. It's just a simple one, but just make sure everything's looking straight and neat and organized. Any kind of sagging or warping of anything really in the house could be the sign of a bigger or more expensive issue. So keep an eye out for that. And number 8 is keeping an eye out for mold in the bathrooms and bedrooms specifically, looking on the ceilings, on the walls, around the edges of window frames. Anywhere like that, we want to look out for mold. Aside from being a health hazard, it's a pain to clean. It's a big, can be a problem, especially if you have kids. Black mold can make people really, really sick. And obviously, building inspectors will keep an eye out for any obvious stuff like that. But also if you get a chance to go through the property yourself, or maybe you have another private inspector that goes through it too. But always look out for that sort of stuff, because it can be quite a hard problem to get rid of sometimes, depending on the layout of the house or the airflow in the house. So there you go, there's 8 red flags to look out for when you are checking an investment property. I'm sure there's many, many other things. If you have any ideas of stuff that you always look for when you inspect a property, please let me know below, and also for the benefit of other people. But yeah, hope you found that useful, and I'll see you in the next video.